Hello, this is Mr. Montgomery coming to you live from Laverne, California. Actually, I'm not coming to you live, this is recorded. And today I'm going to be talking about chapter 16 on persuasion. So now that we are all experts on informative speeches, we can move on to talk about persuasive speeches. Now, when we talk about persuasion, we are talking about changing the way people think, believe, or behave. We're trying to get them to do something they're not currently doing, to stop doing something they are already doing, or to keep on doing something or not doing something. We are going to try to get them to refute an idea, to defend a concept, to sell a program, to sell a product, to inspire people to a certain call to action, to do something. The first area that the chapter talks about is ethics and persuasion. Now, we've already talked about ethics when we were talking about informative speeches, and the same rules apply. However, I think we would say that there's more at stake in a persuasive speech. For example, in an informative speech, you're talking about the Statue of Liberty. And let's say you don't remember how many steps are in there. I have no idea how many. But let's say you throw out the number 1,000, when in reality it's 1,800. Okay, so while we still should have our facts straight, or we shouldn't make up facts that aren't true or that we're not sure, at the same time, how much is really at stake with how many steps are in there? Now, the designer and maybe the tour guide might be highly offended, but for most people, not that big of a deal. When it comes to persuasive speeches, however, there is certainly more at stake. And so, because realize we're trying to mess with people's lives. We're trying to get them to believe differently, think differently, act differently. And so we want to make sure that we got our facts down straight. So here's about 5 suggestions from the textbook. Number 1, make sure you can defend your point of view. If you're making a statement, at least one element of this is you probably should believe what you're saying to persuade others. You should have some personal investment in that perspective yourself, not simply kind of cranking out an assignment or giving a speech that you really don't believe what you're saying. Number 2, be honest in what you say. Not only get your facts straight, but there should be some kind of sincerity that is revealing your heart when you're trying to persuade. Number 3, don't quote out of context. Make sure when you're using references and articles and books and authors that when you're putting them in the context that they are actually supporting what you say. You're not lifting them out of context just to make a point and prove your point. Be honest in that way. Number 4, use language appropriately. No name calling, no abusive language towards others. And then finally, the 5th, build your speech on facts and logic, and then appeal to the heart. In other words, think it in terms of mind and heart, that we want to use both to appeal to the mind with facts, logic, truth, but also to the emotions in terms of passion and compassion. And so use both, but establish the mind. It should make sense. It should be a logical presentation. The text then goes on to talk about the psychology of persuasion. That is, kind of how does persuasion work in the mind? One of the points that they make right off the bat is related to how do people, arguing and agreeing or disagreeing among people. When we're kids, we're always told to, with our siblings, don't fight with them, don't argue with them. Don't always disagree. Try to find a way to agree with one another. Well, here we are trying to get you to disagree with other people. And instead of just simply agreeing and getting along, we want some arguing fairly. We want some disagreement. We want some controversy. Because otherwise, if everybody agrees with what you're saying in your persuasive speech, then where is the persuasion element of that speech? So we want to look in this chapter about how to persuade, not simply how to find agreement so that everybody's on the same page all the time. Now, sometimes when you present a topic, some of your topics are going to be rather mild. A silly one that I thought of this morning was, which way does the toilet paper roll go? Does it roll back behind it or in the front? My conclusion is the off the front is the right way to go. One of my arguments might be that way you kind of can pull off the pieces easier than if you can't see them in the back. You may have a different opinion. Maybe somebody could do a speech on that someday. Never had one of those. But anyway, that's fairly mild, although some people can get heated over some other issues. At the same time, there are going to be some other more heated issues, more controversial issues. A couple that I thought of were, who are you going to vote for president? Or should we legalize, I guess it already is legalized, should we keep legalized of marijuana, or for recreational use, maybe just for medicinal use, or should we make it go back to it being illegal? To be honest, that would be my perspective on that. What about abortion? A speech on abortion. Should we have, abortion anytime, limited time, no abortion? What would be your perspective on that? And so we have to understand that some topics are going to be easier to address, some are going to be more challenging. Some people will agree with you rather straightforward. Others will never agree with you no matter what. So we're trying to look for that group of how can we persuade people. There's a chart in the textbook that kind of a spectrum where it starts with a strongly object, mildly object. I'm getting it messed up here. Strongly opposed, mildly opposed, neutral, somewhat, one more time. Strongly object, mildly object, somewhat object, neutral, somewhat in favor, mildly in favor, and then strongly in favor. And when you give a presentation, usually you're going to have people all over that spectrum. And when we try to understand, well, how would I define a successful speech? Do I have to take somebody from strongly opposed all the way over to strongly in favor? And the textbook points out, which is good news for us, and a successful speech is basically moving anybody from wherever they are at the beginning on that spectrum and just kind of moving them in the direction that we are proposing. And it may be that they now, instead of mildly disagree, they are at neutral, and that would be considered a successful speech. So that's good news for your perspective on that. Okay, so I'm going to take a break there and move on to the next video.